Every superhero has an origin story. One of the things we know about Ralph was that during the liberation of Holland, Ralph and his brother Tice came across two Canadian soldiers in a building. They were exhausted from the fighting. Ralph invited them back to his house, and Alma gave them some food and a safe place to rest and rebuild their strength. I've got an origin story too, and Ralph's in it. When I was a kid, my family was driving to Edmonton from Fort McMurray to spend Christmas with everyone. We were in an accident, and my father and my sister died. The few years before that and a few after all mixed up in my head. I have some clear memories, but no real timeline. My mom was pretty messed up, so for a long while I was taken into the loving arms of family. I remember I spent a lot of time at Oma and Opa's, my Oma and Opa's, and also a lot of time at Ralph and Betty's. This time I was the refugee. I needed a safe place to rest and regain my strength. Having spent so much time there, I figure I have a bit of insight into Ralph's philosophy of parenting, at least as far as boys are concerned. In a lot of respects, it was hands off. You had a roof over your head and clothes on your back. The sheets were mostly clean, and there was peanut butter and jam in the cupboard and a crate full of Pop Shop under the stairs. For the most part, you were expected to be out of the house if the sun was up. Life was something that happened out there. He made sure his kids got out and experienced the world. We were always doing stuff: skating, skiing, water skiing, swimming, roller skating, horseback riding. It was all incredibly annoying to me. I mean, they had all 26 volumes of the World Book Encyclopedia in their living room, plus the annual updates. I mean, why go out there when you had the entire world on a shelf in your living room and a TV in the den downstairs? But no, Elk Island, Wabamun, Shuswap, it was incessant activity. And we were not alone. Our orbit was constantly intersecting with various and sundry Gradanuses, Polses, and Teamstras. To my horror, academic excellence was neither required nor expected. Our religious education, however, was efficiently outsourced to the professionals. Church every Sunday and West Edmonton Christian School during the week. I seem to remember something called the Calvinist, was it Calvinist Cadet Corps on Wednesday nights. And in summer, we were off to Ross Haven Bible Camp. This was Ralph as a dad. I mean, we weren't having long conversations on philosophy or politics. He was a working man, and I was 8 years old, but I was safe, it was warm, and I was exposed to new challenges and experiences with alarming frequency. Speaking of orbits, Ralph always seemed eager to expand his. He absolutely loved new places and new people. The man had an ability to make friends like nothing I've ever seen. I remember when Hisami and I brought her parents to Canada one summer. It was their first trip abroad, and everyone wanted to make it special. We went out to Elk Island Park to show them the buffalo, which was a pretty big deal for them. I remember we were walking around at one point, and there was a couple with a huge motorhome. Ralph figured my in-laws had never seen anything like that. So he walked right on up and said, "I've got some people here from Japan. Do you think you could show them your setup?" Next thing you know, they're extending the sides, and we're walking around inside. We also went to one of those big pavilions, and inside there's this huge Serbian family roasting a pig on a spit in the big barbecue. Ralph walks up. "I've got some people here from Japan. Do you think they could try some of that?" Next thing you know, we were munching away on hot pork. Walking up to strangers is not something Japanese people do, and it made a wonderful impression on my in-laws on just how friendly Canadians are. But we all know that Ralph was special in that way. He had an openness that people immediately responded to. He knew that if he had 2 cigarettes in his pack or a couple of sticks of gum in his pocket, he could make a friend. I also remember walking through the farmers market in downtown Edmonton with Deb and Dennis a few years back. And sure enough, Ralph is sitting there on his walker, right in the middle of everything. I asked him what he was doing, and he said, "Well, there are lots of people to talk to here." Not that he didn't have his opinions, he did. Not that he wasn't ever stubborn or grudgy. He could be. I mean, it's not every guy who'll drink a cup of bleach to prove a point. But he also had a graciousness we seem to have lost in recent years. He wasn't triggered by different opinions like we seem to be nowadays. He could listen to someone who said something he disagreed with. He might say their opinion was crazy, but it always came across in a good-natured and non-threatening way. He could say, "Oh, okay," and leave it at that. Ralph had his habits, of course, and they sometimes got him into a spot of trouble. He liked a cup of coffee in the morning at Timmy's, no problem there. He liked cigarettes. He was a bit confused why everyone was getting so excited. After all, it's just smoke. He loved to drive, but we can all agree that the residents of Edmonton breathed a collective sigh of relief when he finally gave up his keys. And like many of his generation, he had a way of expressing himself that by modern standards occasionally lacked finesse. I remember there was one word I tried to get him to stop saying. When I did this, he would lay out his logic for me. He says, "I'm Dutch. I'm a Dutchman." "Okay," I would say, "you're from Holland. You're Dutch. You're a Dutchman. How about my wife? Where's she from?" "Japan," he would say. "Yes, she's Japanese." "So she's a Japanese woman, right?" "Right." "Good. Now imagine there's a guy from China. He's a Chinaman." Well, you pick your battles. And anyone who knew Ralph knew that there was nothing malicious about any of it. After all, it was just a little smoke. And even the police had to admit that despite the common denominator, all those accidents were the other guy's fault. Now, I'm not a Christian, but I've gotten pretty good at spotting them in the wild. When I was a kid, the key was to look for the little fish on the back of the car. It's gotten even easier in the past couple of decades. The trendy thing now is to throw praises to God into every conversation, Facebook post, or email. In the new vocabulary, every good thing seems to be a blessing. It's all a little shrill, if you ask me. I'll tell you this, in my 56 years of life, Ralph and I never had a conversation about God. We might talk about what was going on in the church, but we didn't talk about God. I'll tell you another thing. Every time I talk about Christians I admire, I talk about Ralph. A lot of people write a check and call that their Christian duty. Maybe they're too busy to do more. Most of the time, I think they're too afraid. The differences that make the rest of us nervous, the differences that most of us congratulate ourselves for tolerating, these were the differences that Ralph celebrated and sought out. He loved meeting people from different backgrounds, races, and faiths, and he respected them. Social or economic standing didn't matter a damn to him. The gender stuff probably confused him, as it does most of the old folk, but he didn't discriminate when it came to creating a connection or lending a helping hand. Look at all the things he did as a volunteer. It's really something. He helped put a roof over people's heads. He helped them get the clothing and food their families needed. He helped them babysit. He gave people a ride from A to B when they needed one. He helped single mothers learn how to budget their money. Clearly a mistake, that. Probably some damage done there. But he showed up. Just like Christ taught, he was right there with the people who needed help. Did he do too much? Was he ever taken advantage of? I don't know. What I do know is that he didn't begrudge anyone a few bucks in gas money for a ride or a couple of hours of his time to babysit. Sure, Ralph liked to be needed. He liked to be relied on. But if those are faults, we could all afford to be a bit more imperfect like that. Here's what I'm getting at. Ralph didn't need to tell anyone that he was a Christian. All we ever had to do was watch him. He didn't need to talk about God. He didn't need to name drop. His faith was deep in his bones and obvious in his fidelity to his family and his fellow man. Ralph was my uncle, but he was also a father to me and a dear friend. He taught me how to enjoy life and showed me how much of it there was to enjoy. He taught me how you can find happiness in reaching out. I'm going to miss him.